Let's welcome in our good friend from Husker 24/7, back from another paternity leave. It is Mike Schaefer. Good morning.
Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Good. How was your vacation?
Good. It was good. I mean, I enjoyed a little lake life during the 4th of July holiday. You know, had a bit of news that I had to try to chase down while on a boat in the middle of a nice Nebraska lake, but it helped that I had a little bit of advanced knowledge of what was coming, so we weren't out of position. But I would strongly prefer if Nebraska would stop having to replace assistant coaches in what's supposed to be the slowest month of the calendar year. But it's college football, and they do whatever they want. So we just react to it appropriately.
Did you have to dock immediately? What was the process? How far out on the lake were you when you realized you had to get something out there?
We were pretty far out on the lake. The good news was, like I said, I had been chasing this since Wednesday. We had heard Nebraska was interviewing defensive backs coaches. And they still had the position filled. So we were sort of chasing that earlier in the week. So we kind of had an idea of what was coming. But it was a situation where I got a phone call right before we went out of service. I was able to shoot Michael Bruntz a text.
Okay.
We went out of service. I did not want to ruin the boat ride for other people. So I kept the faith. And when we got back into service, my phone went off like the 4th of July, and I saw that Bruntz had received the text. We had a story up. I saw that Pete Thamel had gotten the news out to the masses, the awaiting masses, and we were off and running at that point. And I just went back to enjoying a nice beverage and the boat.
I know. Good. Hey, Capitol Lake looks really good this time of the year.
It was not Capitol Lake.
Oh,
I'm fairly certain that you can have coverage throughout the entirety of Capitol Lake. I'm not positive. If someone would like to invite me on a boat on Capitol Lake, I can check that and get back to you guys. But I will wait to see which listener wants to have me on their boat.
I haven't been to Capitol Lake. So the late Adrian Fiala used to live out there, and he'd have a big party during the summer before football kicked off. I really liked it out there. I haven't been back out there. It's still a nice area, right?
Yeah, as far as I know, I have not spent a ton of time out there. I know probably about 6 years ago, actually longer than that now, 8 years ago, when I'm in just the peak of my bachelordom, there was a like 1 bedroom, 1 bath little house on Capitol Lake that was available. And I strongly considered selling my place to just move into this, assuming that I was never going to find anyone anyways. Why would I need a big house when I could live on a lake and, you get 1 bedroom, 1 bath? What more do you need? So I sometimes wonder if I should have just done that. Then we could have kept that house and, somehow lived with 2 houses in Lincoln on the salary of a journalist. That makes sense.
That would have been great. And then your life got interrupted. So I guess you're the better man for it.
Would you have been a boat guy?
I don't think so. So that's I very much would love to live on water, but I have almost no interest in buying, maintaining, operating, doing anything with the boat. Like, I want access to the people that have the boat. I'm willing to offer small amounts of money to ride the boat. I just don't want all the excess stuff that comes along with being a boat owner. I can barely handle being a car owner. Like, I don't know that I can, I don't know that really is going to translate well if I somehow was in position to have a boat. Like a paddle boat, sure, I can do that. A canoe, a kayak, those are things I can handle. If it has a motor, there's a good chance that I'm not the right person for the job.
John Butler, football is football. Other than, and I said this earlier, outside of the institutional knowledge that Evan Cooper had, I think he'll be able to do the football things. But it is also the recruiting part of it, which is in your wheelhouse. And he already started to talk to targets or guys that have committed. Will it be what kind of a transition do you think it will be for a guy that's been out of the college game for a while to get back in where you have to recruit, and the recruiting landscape is much different from the last time John Butler was in college?
Yeah, I think this is a hire that wouldn't have happened if Matt Rhule wasn't relatively confident that John Butler could turn the gears on to recruit. I mean, I think if anyone would be well-versed in the idea of leaving the NFL world and coming back to the college world and the transition that requires, it would be Matt Rhule. So I would anticipate during the process of determining that John Butler was the guy, he had to feel good about his ability to go out and recruit. And a lot of that is your defensive backs coach. You look through the history of what Nebraska's had at defensive backs and the coaches they've had, they've almost all been one of your better recruiters. Like, I can't think of a staff that I've covered where the defensive backs coach hasn't been a really important piece in your recruiting operation. I mean, that goes back to Bo, that continues through, Mike Riley, that continues through Scott Frost, and now we're into Matt Rhule. And so John Butler, I think, has to be a factor in recruiting. He doesn't have to be your best recruiter. He doesn't have to be Evan Cooper when it comes to the evaluation. Nebraska is going to have to figure out how to replace both of those pieces. But John Butler is going to have to be a factor on the road. He's going to have to be a factor in the ears of recruits because if he's not, it just feels like that's too much of a loss. Like, I'm serious. Think about all the names Nebraska's had at defensive back coach throughout the last decade plus. We're talking Dante Williams. We're talking Terry Joseph. We're talking, Travis Fisher was probably the least accomplished recruiter of that group, and yet he was still pretty darn good when it came to connecting with these recruits and several of the guys. And he had help. I mean, certainly there's always help, but several of the guys that he's had went on to have nice careers and were pretty good players that he kind of identified. So I don't know that if you're Nebraska, you're ever looking to take a step back in the recruiting side of things at the defensive back coaching spot. And so I think John Butler has to be good on the road. So I feel like Matt Rhule had to have gotten that feeling during the interview. And we know his resume speaks for itself as far as the coaching thing. I think Gary is 100% correct in that the on the field, the football side of it, I don't really have any questions there. And I don't really have a lot of questions with the hire. It's more so the fascination with how he got to the point that I would regard Evan Cooper as the closest coach in Matt Rhule's staff. And now he's no longer there. What does that mean for Rhule? What does that mean for the recruiting operation? Those are all things that we're going to be in wait and see mode.
Okay, so that's a great lead into this next one. Gary had brought this question up on Monday of Nebraska still looking for that hammer, if you will, when it comes to a coach on staff to be not necessarily the closer, because I think Matt Rhule would still kind of be considered that guy, but the real presence amongst that coaching staff that when he shows up, he presents a really good pitch. Evan Cooper was a strong candidate amongst that staff. Who do you look at now on that staff that would be close to that hammer, if you will, or that real strong recruiting presence?
I don't know if there's somebody that you could really say that about. I mean, it's Tony White, but it's also hard, and we've seen this before when it was Eric Shenander. It's really hard when your defensive coordinator is also maybe your best recruiter, because it's such a split role. Like you need your defensive coordinator to do so many other things that he can't be that focused on recruiting. But if he's a really good recruiter, he's going to want to be involved in recruiting. Mm-hmm. And so, it's one of those things where you would love for Tony White or whomever, your coordinators, to be good recruiters, but you don't want them to be your best guy. There's a reason, like a Larry Johnson Sr., the defensive line coach, just an unbelievable recruiter who also wasn't the Ohio State defensive coordinator. Like, it's just or Penn State for that matter too, when he was there. So it's a scenario where you would love to have one of these assistant coaches establish themselves as being the best recruiter on Nebraska's staff without this other coordinator role. I don't know who that is right now. And I don't know that I would have said that Evan Cooper, in terms of the recruitment side of things, was Nebraska's best recruiter, but he was involved in a lot of it. He was undoubtedly Matt Rhule's eyes when it came to evaluation, though. And so that's where I don't know how that gets replaced. That's got to be an internal thing. I don't know if that's in the recruiting office. I don't know if they go out and they try to find, another analyst or two to help out. But he did a lot of the evaluation, and he was sort of the yay or nay on some players that Nebraska's really hit on. I'm thinking about Jalen Lloyd. I'm thinking about, some of the guys they have coming up on their defense that he sort of saw them and it's like, hey, what about this guy? And I think Nebraska benefited from that. So they're going to have to replace that in some way.
Hey, this is a favorite game of mine. Name former Nebraska assistant coaches, and you were rattling off a couple of guys. And there are some coaches that maybe were only here for a cup of coffee as assistant coaches that are some obscure names. Do you remember the name Scott Booker?
Yeah, he was, he was here in an unfortunate circumstance where Bob Elliott passed away. I don't want to go too far down this road, but there's always been a part of me a little bit better if Bob Elliott
100% with you. 100% with you.
been there. I mean,
That's why he was coming.
Probably don't realize how important that relationship was. And then they kind of had to grab somebody, and on the fly. And not that Scott Booker isn't a professional, and he certainly was at Nebraska, but I don't think it was going to have the same impact as having Bob Elliott. And Bob Elliott, I think, could communicate in a way that maybe Bob Diaco wasn't able to, and could sort of help manage him as he was managing the roster. Anyway, Bob Elliott and Scott Booker, kind of it's just a unique situation there in 2017, and it's sort of we don't talk about that a lot in the what if scenario.
Well, and also I'm 100% with you because of Bob Elliott's acumen to help Diaco, but I also think he would have helped Mike Riley.
Yeah, I mean, Bob Elliott was a professional assistant coach through and through. I mean, you look at that guy's resume, you listen to the way people would talk about him. He was just really, really well revered. And not to make a strange comparison here, but there's not a whole lot of I should say it like this. There's a lot of similarities there with John Butler. The way that John Butler is discussed in the profession, the way he's discussed by players that have been coached by him. I think that's a really well respected, really well liked guy. I think the value of what he can bring to the staff is immense. I mean, he's probably, if you think about it, you think of everyone they have on that staff, he's as experienced as a coach as they now have. I mean, that's quite a find in, early July when you have to make a move that you probably weren't anticipating you were going to make at this point.
Schaefer, a big announcement of the practice for fans to be able to attend on August 3rd with the NIL component. We know what that does to 1890, what that does for what Nebraska wants to continue to fill with the NIL. It shows that they're outside the box thinking. It shows that they're willing to give fans access or experiences that otherwise they wouldn't get. If you're somebody that's considering Nebraska or somebody that is on the radar, and let's say you get 25, 30,000 people at a practice on a Saturday night in fall camp, what is that type of impact when it comes to how NIL impacts Nebraska's recruiting for future prospects?
Well, they can't have recruits there because it's during a dead period.
But when you hear about it and see it, and obviously it would make national headlines if Nebraska gets this huge turnout for something like this.
Yeah, I'd actually be relatively impressed if 25,000 people wanted to go watch practice. And they might, because it's Nebraska. Mm-hmm. And I think the excitement over Dylan Raiola and this upcoming season is going to be borderline fever pitch at that point. So, I could see that being a thing that stands out. I mean, the way Nebraska will do it, the way that it could definitely stand out is, in the component of that many people show up, and then Nebraska's award-winning video staff makes it into this great cinematography moment, and you flash that about on Twitter and on, your YouTube page and on the socials, and it gets back to the recruits and they see what that environment kind of looks like. But none of that really matters if they don't turn around and win games this upcoming season. None of that really matters if that NIL money doesn't find its way back towards the roster and to the recruits. It all looks nice. It all sounds good. It's a good idea. It's a really good idea. And the follow through on it, I'm sure, is going to be fantastic. But I don't know that it really ultimately is going to mean anything if they don't start winning football. We're sort of at that point, and obviously you can't win football games here in July as there is not games to be played. But I think we kind of reached the point with NIL where, whatever Nebraska can do in that side of it is only going to be enhanced by the way that they go out and play on the football.
Mm-hmm.
They can come up with all the great ideas they want. They can fund as many things as they possibly can. You still got to go out and win football games. There's a reason Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama are going to go get the best players, and it's because they win a ton of football games. There's a reason Michigan's having a nice resurgence in recruiting right now under Sharon Morris, who's never really coached a critical game. It's because they just won the national championship. Mm-hmm. Like we can talk until we're blue in the face about Nebraska's resources and its environment and the fan base and the atmosphere and all of this stuff. It is now officially time to win a bunch of football games. And nobody knows that they're on the clock more than I think Matt Rhule. And so he's got to manage the fact that, you know, there's probably a sense of desperation or urgency, is probably a better word. Desperation's in the fan base. But there's an urgency to make this season count. And I think that's going to play over in how they talk, how they act, and everything as we lead up to the year.
I like the word that's been used as an obligation to the fans, to ourselves and to the fans. One of my favorite parts of the offseason on Liss is when everybody's favorite threesome gets together, and at Husker 24/7 you do the most indispensable Huskers. You're up to John Bullock at 11. Can
we just take a second and just marvel
about your threesome?
At John Bullock?
Oh,
no. We can always marvel at Husker 24/7, but John Bullock has made himself not only an indispensable Husker, but an unquestioned indispensable Husker. How many people would have thought that at this time last year?
I'm going to raise my hand and say, you and I may have had a discussion when he was a senior at Prep. And I'm like,
I sure. Like, I know that there's talent there, but the idea that we're talking about
indispensable. Yes.
Football,
I'm with you.
You know, like this is remarkable. And this is also quick side tangent. This is why Nebraska needs those rosters to stay around 110. You know, they can't really, for a program like Nebraska, the value they derive off of that is so huge that they can't afford for it to get knocked down to 100 or whatever.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought him up because I listened to Rob Dvorak last night. And it was almost like, you know, everybody's like, John Butler's going to be the next DC. And Dvorak's like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. Yeah. But his linebacker room, which Bullock is part of, don't you think John Bullock is such a Matt Rhule type guy that's why John Bullock can thrive here? Because I know which players Rhule really likes or his assistants really like, because they don't go into their physical attributes. One of the first things out of their mouth when they describe a player is they love playing football. John Bullock loves playing football. Now, he has increased his ability to be able to stay on the field, but loves football, because I thought last night through my radio, I was going to have a relationship that was going to go from the radio to just blowing up between Dvorak and Vincent Schaefer, who, when anybody that describes a kid who is an absolute steal for Nebraska, and you're back me up on this, Schaefer, they say he loves football. So I think guys that love football are get elevated in this program.
Yeah, and then to take that a step further, the guys that are willing to line up at any position, whether they've never played it before, the guys that are going to show up on special teams, even if they have starting roles, the guys that are going to stay in the meeting room or in the position room or in the film room until the end of the night having football discussions or wanting to break things down or wanting to get that one last piece of knowledge before they shut their eyes for the day. I mean, yeah, that's Matt Rhule. That's who he is. So, of course, he's going to love those type of players. It's not a surprise that a guy like John Bullock or Isaac Gifford thrived under him, or Vincent Schaefer has a chance to, because they all, like you said, have that critical part of the football DNA that isn't always there. Some of the most talented people I've ever watched, I would not say love college football or love football. They play football. It's a means to the end. Some of these guys play because it's absolutely the first thing they think of when they wake up in the morning, and it's the last thing they think of before they go to bed at night. And there's a big difference, and those guys tend to get every ounce of talent out of themselves, and every ounce of effort that they put in is rewarding. And so, yeah, I think Vincent Schaefer is going to be another one of those. What's fascinating is, as a recruit, I think he was really well regarded. People didn't know quite where to play him. He falls in that tweener size. And then I think there was some potential concerns about eligibility, but Nebraska did not have that. And he's someone that really is putting himself on the cusp of taking some playing time from a Mekhi Bayer, of taking some playing time from some of those guys in the inside linebacker room, not because they haven't earned it, but because he's almost making himself undeniable, making himself inevitable. And isn't that what, we hear Matt Rhule sort of talk about in these situations and circumstances? And he's doing that as a true freshman. Like, that's pretty impressive.
Okay, so another guy, and I know you showcased him on a potential breakout profile, in a guy that I am fascinated to see this year because of now having another year of being healthy and a different quarterback that will be throwing him the football, and Thomas Fidone. I ask you this question, Schaefer.
You're the guy that loves football.
Exactly, and that's why I bring him up as well. But I ask you this question, more important for Thomas Fidone to have that breakout year, the fact that it is his second year in a row with hopefully having any type of health issues behind him, or the type of guy that will be throwing him the football?
I mean, it's obviously a combination of both. But with all the respect to Dylan Raiola, the most exciting aspect of Thomas Fidone for 2024 is that this is the longest extended run of health he's had since high school.
Mm-hmm.
And, we tend to think of these players in video game terms where when they advance in age, their skill set keeps going up and they keep developing. But that wasn't really the case for a Fidone, where he lost 2 straight years of actually being able to go out and have reps, of being able to even practice. Like, he couldn't be a practice squad player because he was hurt. He couldn't get on the field. I mean, he had the famous tweet of wanting to be uncaged, and Nebraska couldn't do it because he wasn't cleared to play. So, I think the biggest thing going for Thomas Fidone is his health, and the fact that he was able to put together a fully healthy spring. And that hasn't always, multiple of them now. And that's coming off of a fully healthy fall of 2023. So I think there's really no way to gauge just how good he could be this upcoming year, because we really haven't seen him have this extended run of health since he's come from Lewis Central.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of that, regardless of who is throwing him the football, he's going to be a better player. Now, add in the fact that it's a quarterback with maybe a little bit better touch and isn't going to lead him, up into the air on some of those throws, can probably put it a little more accurately in a way that we could see him run. I mean, one of the things that maybe you guys remember this, one of the best plays that Thomas Fidone had in the entire season came against Michigan State, when he was able to catch the ball in stride and then also run after the catch. We didn't get to see that a lot last year. I think we're going to see that more on some of those drag routes. And potentially, if you forget about Thomas Fidone because of all the other weapons potentially in the passing game, that's a guy that can burn you too. Like, there's a lot of stuff we haven't seen from a player that's uber talented that makes it, a very, very easy breakout pick, almost to the point where it feels dumb to write the story. But, people want the content, so why wouldn't I put it out?
Hey, will we be surprised by number 1 on this list? Were you guys in agreement? Because one thing, if people haven't followed along, and I don't know why you're not, at the end, you all give what you selected. Like John Bullock, I think you had 12th. Brunson might have had 10th. He ends up 11th. Did you guys all have number 1 across the board?
I don't think so. I think we each had a different person, if I recall correctly.
Okay.
I think we each had a different person, if I recall correctly, because I think ultimately we each valued, if this person wasn't on the roster, what would it do for everything else, a little bit differently. But I think we had 3 different number 1s. I'd have to go back and consult. Part of the problem I have with this exercise is that we make the list in early June, and then it kind of just disappears from my head. So I'm sitting here trying to not second guess who I had at number 1, but I'm fairly certain that my name was different than BC's name. Maybe those two were the same, but I know that there's at least one split in it.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you as always. Enjoy your weekend, and may it be quiet in your universe.
Oh, we got some defensive back announcements. We'll see what the change in the coaching staff had to do with that. But 24/7 Sports will have Aiden Manikai later today announcing his commitment. Could it be Nebraska? I don't know.
Bryson,
I think the change in the coaches might have changed some things.
Quick one here. Bryson Weber still in?
Bryson Weber, I feel better about than Manitai. He's supposed to decide either Saturday or Sunday, but I think that one, Nebraska's sitting better at this point.
Fantastic, my friend. Have a good weekend.
All right, guys. Have a good one.
Mike Schaefer, 24/7. Mike J. Schaefer on